Welcome in, everybody, to another special edition of AYS here at Service Hawk Digital Media, where they soar above the competition. Expert marketing for HVAC, electrical, and generator pros. You need to get over to Service Hawk Digital. You own a business, you run a business, you need to get in the digital space. Go over to Service Hawk Digital Media today for your ultimate goal. All of these special edition episodes that we're publishing here on YouTube are brought to you by our good friends over at C&D Plumbing. If you got plumbing problems, that's a tongue twister, trust the pros over at C&D Plumbing, serving the river region with fast, reliable, residential, and commercial services. C&D has earned their reputation for quality and honesty. When you need a plumber that you can count on, call C&D Plumbing at 985-304-8556. That's 985-304-8556, where your problem is their top priority. So in today's special episode, we're going to be talking about, I know that we mentioned this a lot last night, but kind of doubling down and talking about it again. But LSU football is expecting to start spring practice in March, early March. March the 8th will be the first day, and Brian Kelly will be addressing the media today. So I'm sure that we'll talk about that tonight when you and I link up. But Brian Kelly and this football team starting, look, you have the press conference today. Things are going to start getting rolling here. He'll talk about some of the transfers and other things as well. But yesterday, the win totals came out for what is projected for LSU in the 2025 season, for it being 8.5. Last night, we talked about that there's a lot of perception out there that the floor, the outright floor, meaning the worst thing that can happen to LSU in the 2025 season, was having 9 wins. That was what I saw a lot of people talking about and I addressed last night and want to address again here today. I think the FanDuel number at 8.5 at the current moment feels about right. I don't know what I would take if you asked me, Blake, the over or under. What would you take of what you believe that LSU would do in the 2025 season? I certainly feel that the ceiling is much higher than 8.5 wins, but I don't know what the floor is, because when you go into a season where, hey, you have a lot of questions, that along your offensive and defensive lines, and your secondary, at safety, what do you do in the running game? All of those specific things continue to mount, and that questions that we don't know. Now, I do think there are two things and two folds here that we need to discuss. Number one, I do believe that there's a time and place where we're going to start getting some of these answers. Hell, from a month from now, well, probably even a little bit more than a month from now, we'll probably start getting some of those answers to that questions. How does LSU run out in their secondary? What does the first team offensive line look? We'll start getting some of those answers to all the questions that we have. But I'm not sure that 8.5 isn't a good and fair number. And I don't know if the reality or the perception of our reality is that we should say the floor is 9 wins. So basically, what we're saying here is if the outright worst thing that can happen is you having 9 wins, which would mean that you're ultimately a playoff team, where I don't necessarily disagree with that, depending on the answers that we'll get. There are questions that we have. Now, last night, I got a little spirited in the debate that some of you had with myself on just simple questions that I had. I think that these are realities, and I think that we get into sports and specifically football when we look at things and say to ourselves, well, this guy's coming back. You have this guy coming in. You have that guy coming in. It's very easy to fall into the prism of, well, we have this, and this before we've seen them in an LSU uniform. Or do we know that players can take a developmental step? Number one, we always know and believe that players can take a developmental step. And a lot of times when we look at this, when we say that there's questions, we look at the quarterback, which you have a second-year starter returning in Garrett Nussmeier that we'll mention, but you have a lot of pieces that you do still return that you can utilize. And talking about the floor being 9 wins, I am not sure that I am confident yet to say that this team is going to be an outright playoff team yet. I think that when I look at this team and I look at the talent that they have generated through the transfer portal, I look at the things that they have added and pieces that they've added. If if I did not know, if a year from now you and I are sitting here at Service Hawk Digital Media and we're talking about LSU football and we're talking about the playoff run that LSU just went on, it would not shock me. It also would not shock me if you replicate what you did a year ago. I think LSU is in a very unique position that's different than teams that highly went in the portal like Florida State and Ole Miss. You know, when LSU went into the portal the way that they did, a lot of comparisons got made to, well, you know, Ole Miss went in the portal and they went 9-3. You know, Florida State went in the portal and it was a complete collapse. The difference between LSU and Ole Miss and Florida State with teams that have vastly gone in the portal, they did not recruit high school at the level and in the level of what LSU did. They didn't have a base. You know, when I look at Ole Miss, guys, they're not cracking the top 15 from high school football recruiting. I look at Florida State. I know that they did it this year, but in his history of Mike Norvell, they had not been recruiting at a high level out of high school the way that LSU had. There had not been a lot of developmental pieces. I look at the offensive line. I look at the running back room. I look at the wide receiver room. I look at the defensive line in the interior specifically of how you've recruited in high school. Linebackers. You didn't go in the portal and get a linebacker in the interior. What are you going to do at safety? Now, you did go get to Marcus Cooley, but a lot of those guys that you're going to rely on heavily and try to develop are from the high school ranks. So I do think that there are a couple of things here that when we look at a team and we look at, hey, there's a massive portal haul, that it could go like Ole Miss. Well, it could go like Ole Miss. It could go like, I'm not going to say it's going to go like Florida State. I don't think there's any way that you go 2-10, that there is a floor that is set. If there is a floor that is set, then I do think it's around 8.5. I do think that could be your floor. The high ceiling of this, and this was the big part of the debate last night, I do think that you could be a playoff team. I do think that there are things and there are talking points that when you look at this team, you could say, hey, man, we made a playoff. And I would not be shocked. What would have to happen for you to be a playoff team in the 2025 year? We've talked about it a lot. That means that you did hit along your defensive line when you went in the portal and got 4 guys. That means that you had a developmental piece in the running game. Either your O-line just got better in the run game, or your running backs got better in the running game, or Garrett, with his experience, got better at making checks and doing different things in the running game, or Garrett in and of himself does some things in the running game where it keeps some teams honest. You're stopping the run. You're defending the run. And by the way, you're not giving up these massive explosive plays in the secondary like you did in the last game that we saw you against Baylor. Those questions have got to be answered before we start saying where that floor is. Now, we talked about Garrett just a minute ago. We at LSU have seen second-year quarterbacks come into LSU in their second year and win the Heisman. The last 2 times that you've had starters that have come in for their second year as the starter, both of those young men, I say young men, I guess they're not really young men anymore, but you saw Joe Burrow and Jaden Daniels win the Heisman. I can only continue to say this as much as I can. I think Garrett's got the ability to. I think he's got the talent around him to do. I do question, does he have the play calling around him to do it? I question, does he have the O-line around him to do it? I think he's got the weapons and Trey'Dez Green and that receiver core with Chris Hilton, Nick Anderson, Aaron Anderson, Barry and Brown, etc. I think he's got weapons that they can attack teams and be very versatile in what they do. But if you do not eliminate those turnovers, that will be an issue. You know, I think of quarterbacks that we've seen in college football in its recent history of what has happened in the second year. Do you have a Quinn Ewers level of development in reference to, look, Quinn developed in a lot of ways, but still in crucial moments he turned the ball over? Or do you have a Jaden Daniels, Joe Burrow type of development where it just is on a different, completely different atmosphere and streak? Or it could be like Cade Klubnik at Clemson, who you play in week 1. That young man has developed better than probably any quarterback that I've seen in modern times, especially in the ACC, depending on where he came from, to now being a 40-touchdown guy in the ACC. I think of Haynes King in that same light. So when we get out there, and I know, as I mentioned, and maybe Brian Kelly's already done his press conference by the time that you're listening to this, but when we look at this team, when we look at how they're being built, and I'm sure Brian Kelly's going to bring in and talk about today a lot of guys that they're excited for and things that they've been doing, and the excitement level will be up. And I'm with you on the sense of there should be, number one, there should be a lot of excitement. I still, for me personally, have questions. You can disagree with me. You can humbly disagree with me. But when March 8th happens, I certainly feel that we are going to get some of those answers. But it's where I sit. One thing I do want to mention here as well, before we kind of move on here, maybe talk a little bit more about some football, but kind of finish up with some baseball here too. One thing that I think is going to be interesting for me, I've told you about the secondary. I've told you about when the gates open, March the 8th, and we go and look at this team. From a defensive side of things, the secondary is going to be something that I'm vastly intrigued by and want to go watch and see how they do things. I think it's safety is arguably the biggest position that you need to see and see development and see quick development from some of these young guys and guys like TaMarcus Cooley that you brought in. I'm really interested to see where and how they do things early. What happens with Ashton Stamps? You know, I feel like DJ Pickett's going to come in here and get a lot of playing time, and not only a lot of playing time, I feel as if that he's going to get a crack at this pretty quickly because, look, he's a 5-star kid. Corey recruited him really heavily. He believes that can be the cornerstone at corner for you, pun intended. So I want to see what they do there. But Mansour Delane, as someone else said, it was highly coveted in the portal. A lot of people wanted him. You were able to lock it down and go and get him. Does he start off at the opposite boundary? Now, I'm going to give it a couple of practices before we start making a complete determination of what the rotation looks like, because I do think that you're going to give the shot and the crack to some of the guys that have been here. I gotta say though, it is the most intriguing position for me defensively. One thing that we have not talked about, or we've talked about some, but not a lot, is the offensive line. Look, I think that the O-line, this is how I want to say it. LSU struggled last year along their offensive line, specifically in the running game. They were really good at pass pro. Garrett did not get sacked a lot. And look, relatively speaking, there wasn't necessarily throughout the season, holistically, tons and tons of pressure on him throughout the season compared to other quarterbacks. Something in the back of my mind is telling me that this O-line may be a little bit better in running the football this year and moving guys off the line of scrimmage than we saw a year ago. I don't know what's telling me that. I think it's because we look at this team and we look at just the history. Every time that we've come into the season and worried about had the biggest worries, it's normally at times and moments been a little bit of a strength. Now, the defensive line was a big worry last year, especially in the interior. Down the stretch, it really hurts you, whether it be A&M, Alabama, whether it be, whatever game, Florida, whatever game you want to mention, it was a problem down the stretch. So that worry came out to pass of what LSU had. I'm really intrigued about this offensive line. You got to be better there. And quite frankly, we need to see a lot more development. We need to see the development of these guys that have been in this system for a couple of years now. What does a guy like Weston Davis look like? Does he get that start at right tackle? Does he get that first crack at right tackle? What does it look like in the two interior pieces with Josh Thompson and Braylon Moore that you brought in? Does Paul Mabinga start at left guard? And how do you replace a top 10 pick in the NFL draft? I say top 10 pick, potentially a top 10 pick in Will Campbell, which I still think that he will go there. The offensive side of things, more than receiver, more than running back, more than the development of Garrett Nussmeier. If Garrett does not have time, none of this is going to matter. The talking point of him and eliminating some of those turnovers and missing some guys that are open, it is eliminated in the sense of that if he does not have time and if he's not protected well, he's not going to do anything. Now, you got to do things to take pressure off of him. These 3, 5, 7-step drops, I mean, they work, and you need to be able to push the ball down the field. But I also feel like that you got to do some things and some play calling things like, hey, man, you go trips left, Throw a bubble screen and get 6 yards. Take pressure off of him if you need to. If you can't run the ball, we did not do. I say we like I'm a part of the team. I don't think LSU did a good enough job at helping Garrett out in crucial situations. I don't. I really do not believe that we had a situation where you gave him favorable throws. Now, there were times that you did and he missed, and there were some times that he made bad decisions, and I get all of that. But we got to put him in a better position to make plays and take some of that pressure off of him. The number one thing that you can do, the number one thing that's got to happen here, you got to be able to run the football and help him out. You got to be able to, you see it in the NFL, you see it in college football, wherever you watch a football game, when you can line up and run the football and move the ball by just lining up and simply handing the ball off, the pressure on the quarterback takes a very, very big dip on what they have to do. They can make some throws that maybe they wouldn't in the past because they have to, or in the past when they couldn't run the ball, when they need to convert. So it's going to be very interesting. I hope that you can be better. I think you got to be better in the interior, and quite frankly, the running backs in a lot of directions and places have got to be a lot more special too. To wrap it up here, look, it's not missed upon me while we're here at Service Hawk. I know that our good friend Justin, really big fan of LSU baseball. I am as well. This what I'd say is closing it out here for this segment. I am really intrigued by this team. It feels like a week is too long, right? Like I don't know if I can wait a week. Clearly we can. But the anticipation for this season is mounting, and we're here. So I'm really interested to see how things start out. I'm excited. I'm sure that you guys are excited. But, man, it's going to be a great season. I feel it in my bones that we're going to have a great season. I hope that we have a great season. We all need it after the football season we just had. All right. We'll see you guys soon. You have a good one. Peace.